heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock slid into place from the other side. A boot pressed against the wood and held it firm. From inside came laughter, glass clinking, a toast being raised. An old man stood on the steps with a small leather case at his feet. Rain began to fall. He pounded on the door once, twice. Nobody answered. A footman appeared at an upstairs window and pulled the curtain shut. He stepped back, looked up at the house he had built. 60 years of his life behind those walls. All of it now in the hands of the people who had just bolted him out. His name was Edmund Ashworth, the Duke of Welberry. By sundown he would be wandering a forest road with nothing but a walking stick and a title. What that forest held would undo everything. Stay with me on this one. He walked for 2 hours. The road that led from Welberry Hall to the village curved through oak and beech. He did not take the road. He cut through the pasture, then through the hedgerow, then into the older woods where his father used to ride. The leather case grew heavier with every mile. So did the cold. A duke in a soaked coat. A walking stick that had cost more than most men earned in a year. And nothing else. He thought about his wife. Catherine had been dead 5 years. She would have known what to do. She always did. When Marcus was small and the boy first showed signs of cruelty, pulling the wings off moths, laughing when a stable boy was kicked, Catherine had been the one to take him aside and try to set him straight. Edmund had been too busy, building the steel mill near Bristol, negotiating the canal rights, tripling the family fortune in 20 years. That was Edmund's gift. Money, land, power. Catherine had been the one who tried to give Marcus a soul. She had failed, and now Edmund was paying for it. 2 months ago, his son had come to him with papers. A trust restructure. Routine, Marcus said. The lawyers had been on it for a year. Just a signature on the last page. Edmund had signed. He had not read every clause. He was 68. His eyes tired easily, and Marcus was his son. The next morning he woke to find his accounts frozen. By noon a magistrate stood in the entry hall reading aloud the new terms. Edmund had voluntarily transferred all powers of estate management to his heir. Voluntarily. The signature was his. It would hold. Isolde, his daughter, had been at her brother's side. She had not looked at her father once. For 2 months Edmund lived in his own house as a guest. Meals served late. Servants who used to bow now passed him without a word. Marcus moved into the master study. Held banquets. Invited men Edmund had never approved of. Old enemies sat at Edmund's table and laughed at his portrait on the wall. He bore it. A duke does not weep. A duke does not beg. A duke waits for the moment. But the moment did not come. Marcus learned that his father was quiet, and decided the quiet meant defeat. This morning the boot had pressed against the door. The lock had slid into place. And it was done. Edmund kept walking. The light dropped earlier than he had expected. The trees thickened. He had grown up on this land. He knew every ridge of it. As a boy he had hunted these woods with his own father, the old duke. They had spent nights in a cabin at the far edge of the estate, near the spring at Welberry Top. Edmund had not been there in 40 years. He was not even certain the cabin still stood. But he had nowhere else to go. He reached into his coat and felt the signet ring on his finger. Heavy gold. His father's ring. His father's father's before that. Every Duke of Welberry had worn it back through 6 generations. They could not take this from him. Not without cutting off the hand. He pressed forward. The path narrowed to a thread. Brambles tore at his coat. Twice he stumbled and caught himself on the walking stick. He was not a frail man, 68, but tall and broad, hands still hard from the years he had spent learning the work of his own laborers. His father had insisted on that. A duke who could not swing a hammer was a duke who could be cheated by every steward he hired. Edmund had laid bricks, cut hay, driven cattle. He could still do those things at 68. But 68 and alone, in cold rain, was not the same as 68 at the head of a table. He came over a small rise and stopped. There it was. The cabin sat in a hollow, half hidden by ivy and bracken. The chimney still stood. The walls still stood. The shutters were closed and sealed with what looked like fresh nails. Fresh nails. Edmund frowned. He moved closer. The roof was sound. The door was thick oak, banded with iron. No man passing through the woods on a hunt would bother to seal a forgotten cabin with new nails. Someone had been here. Recently. He hesitated only a moment. Then he raised the walking stick and brought it down hard against the latch. The latch broke on the second strike. The door swung inward on hinges that had been oiled. Oiled. He stood on the threshold and listened. No sound. No movement. Just the smell of cold ash and something else underneath. Beeswax, faintly. Lemon oil. The smell of furniture that had been polished within the last year. A forgotten cabin did not smell like polished furniture. Edmund stepped inside and set down the leather case. He let his eyes adjust. It was one large room with a sleeping alcove at the back. Stone hearth on the left wall. A long oak table in the center. 2 chairs. A desk against the far wall, covered with a heavy cloth. A small bookshelf beside the desk. Everything was sheeted in clean white linen, the way a great house covered its furniture when the family went away for a season. Dust there was, but only on the floor. Not on the cloth. Not in the corners. Someone came here. He moved through the room slowly. Lifted the cloth on the table. The wood underneath was clean. Lifted the cloth on the desk. A writing surface. An inkwell with a wax seal still over its lid. A stack of paper. He touched the paper. It was dry. New paper. New ink. He turned. There was a small kitchen nook by the hearth. A copper kettle on its hook. He lifted the lid. Empty. But the inside was clean. Whoever had used this last had washed up before leaving. Edmund sat down on one of the chairs and put his hands on his knees and tried to think. His first thought was poachers. But poachers did not polish furniture. Poachers did not buy fresh paper. His second thought was that one of his old gamekeepers had quietly kept the cabin in repair out of habit, a tribute to the old Duke. That was Kinder. But that did not explain the lemon oil. That did not explain the new nails on the shutters. His third thought he set aside for later. For now he needed warmth. He gathered kindling from a basket by the hearth, split logs, dry, stacked neatly, and started a fire. The flue drew clean. The chimney had been swept. Of course it had. He sat by the fire and let the heat work into his bones. The rain hissed on the roof. His coat began to steam. He realized he had not eaten since dawn. He searched the kitchen nook. Found a tin of hard biscuits, sealed. The seal cracked when he opened it. Inside, 24 biscuits as fresh as the day they were baked. He ate 3 slowly. Then he ate 3 more. Hunger steadied him. Fire steadied him. He looked around the cabin and he allowed himself, for the first time in 2 months, to feel something close to safe. He could live here. For a while. He could rest. Gather himself. Think. But Edmund did not become a man who tripled a fortune by ignoring strange things. And the cabin was strange. He stood up and crossed to the desk. He lifted the cloth fully and set it aside. The desk was old. His father's hand was in the carving on its sides. Edmund recognized the falconry crest his father had favored in his middle years. So this was his father's desk. That much made sense. But the inkwell was new. The paper was new. And the desk drawer, when he pulled it, was locked. He stood there a long moment looking at the lock. Then he knelt down and ran his hand under the desk along the underside. He had watched his father do this once, when he was a boy. Old men with secrets did not leave keys on rings. They taped them, or wedged them. He felt along the runner, the crosspiece, the back panel. Behind the back panel, his fingers found a small brass key. He sat down in the chair and set the key on the desk and stared at it. A locked drawer in his father's cabin. A key hidden where his father had hidden keys 40 years ago. A cabin maintained in fresh polish. Something had been waiting for him. He fit the key into the lock. The drawer slid open. Inside lay a single envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper, sealed with red wax, and pressed into the wax was the falconry crest. His father's seal. Not the Duke's seal. The personal one his father had used only for private letters. The one Edmund himself had never been allowed to touch. The envelope was addressed in his father's handwriting. To my son Edmund, when the door has been closed against him. Edmund did not move for a long time. His father had died 19 years ago. The handwriting was not faded. The wax was not cracked. The envelope had been placed here recently. Within the last year, the last month, perhaps the last week. Someone was reading the signs of his life from a distance and acting on them. Someone had known that one day Edmund would be locked out of his own house and had prepared this drawer for that day. He turned the envelope in his hands. The weight of it, not just paper inside, something thicker, a second smaller envelope perhaps, or a folded map. The fire popped. A log settled. Edmund put the envelope down on the desk, face up, and stared at it. He did not open it. Not yet. He needed a moment first. A breath. He picked up the tin of biscuits, carried it back to the chair by the fire, sat down, ate one more. Then he leaned back and let his head rest against the chair. The rain on the roof, the fire steady, the bread in his belly, the walking stick leaning against the hearth. The signet ring on his finger. For the first time since the door had slammed shut on his own house, Edmund Ashworth felt something close to peace. He thought, I will rest here tonight. I will read the letter in the morning. The cabin is sound. The food will hold for a few days. Nobody knows where I am. Nobody knows where I am. He closed his eyes, and from somewhere in the dark beyond the cabin door, a footstep crunched the wet leaves. Edmund opened his eyes. The footstep did not come again, but it had been there. He had not imagined it. He rose carefully and took the iron poker from the hearth. He moved to the side of the door, out of the line of any window. He listened. A second footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Not a hunter. Not a wild animal. A man walking up to the front of the cabin, taking his time. A knock. 3 short raps. A pause. Then one more. The pattern of a man who did not want to startle whoever was inside. Edmund spoke through the door. His voice was lower than his usual register, and harder. Who is there? A voice came back. Calm. Educated. Older than Edmund had expected. My name is Mr. Hollis. I am a solicitor. I have been waiting some years for you, Your Grace. May I come in out of the rain? Edmund did not move. You have my name. I have many names, Your Grace. I have your father's name and your grandfather's name as well. I have been instructed to attend this cabin at any hour on any day when a member of the Welberry family arrives here alone. I have lodging 2 miles down the road. The boy at the inn brings me word when smoke rises from this chimney. Tonight he brought me word. Here I am. Edmund's hand tightened on the poker. Open your coat. Step back from the door. I will look at you through the window. There was a small grunt of amusement on the other side. Of course. Edmund moved to the front window and lifted the corner of the shutter. A tall, thin man stood 10 paces from the door in a black coat, both lapels held open, hat in one hand, a leather satchel at his feet. White hair, a face like a heron, narrow, watchful, patient. He had no weapon Edmund could see. Edmund let the shutter fall and slid the bolt back and opened the door. Mr. Hollis came in slowly, bowed once at the threshold. A proper bow, deep enough to acknowledge a duke without flattering him, and set his satchel on the table. He looked at the fire, the clear desk, the cracked tin of biscuits, the unopened envelope. You have not read it yet. I have not. Read it now, Your Grace. I will wait. There are things I cannot tell you until you have. Edmund went to the desk. He broke the wax seal with his thumb. his father's hand. The first lines. My dear son, if you are reading this, your own children have closed the door against you. I am sorry. I had hoped you would never need this letter. But your grandfather warned me, and I have prepared as he asked. Edmund read on. His grandfather had built a second fortune. Quietly, over 40 years. Shipping in the East. Cotton mills in Lancashire under a different name. Land in 3 counties held under a trust whose name appeared in no genealogy, on no public record, in no will. The trust had one purpose. It was to be released to a Duke of Welberry only when that duke had been formally cast out by his own legitimate heir. The grandfather had seen this happen to his own father, Edmund's great-grandfather, and had sworn it would never destroy another duke without a remedy. The conditions were specific. The duke had to have been put out of his own house. He had to have been stripped of management of the family estate by his named heir. He had to arrive alone, with nothing but his title, at this cabin. The trust would then activate. The fortune in the trust was, by Hollis's calculation, 3 times what Marcus had seized. Edmund read the letter twice. He read the figures 3 times. Then he set the page down and looked at Mr. Hollis, who was standing very still by the table. How long have you been waiting? 15 years, Your Grace. The previous solicitor was my father. He waited 30 before me. And nobody else knows. Nobody. Your son does not know this cabin exists in any meaningful sense. Your grandfather's records were removed from every estate ledger before your father took the title. The trust is held in a Genoese bank under a name that has not been spoken aloud in a generation. Edmund sat down. The fire crackled. What must I do? Sign 3 documents. Tonight, if you will. I will ride them to London tomorrow. Within 7 days, the funds release and the deeds transfer into your sole name. Within 10 days, if you wish, the trust may exert its claims against any party that has wronged you. My son, among others. Edmund looked at his hands, the signet ring on his finger. He thought about Marcus, somewhere in Welberry Hall right now, raising a glass with men who had laughed at Edmund's portrait. He thought about Isolde, who had not looked at him. He thought about Catherine, dead 5 years. He stood up. He poured himself half a cup of water from the kettle Mr. Hollis had quietly set on the fire. He drank it slowly. Bring me the documents. If you are still with me on this story, hit that subscribe button. There is more to come, and I want you here for the rest of it. Mr. Hollis opened the satchel. He drew out 3 folded documents on heavy paper, each sealed with the same falconry crest. He laid them on the table. He uncapped his ink. He passed Edmund the pen. Edmund signed each one with the long, careful hand he had used to sign nothing but his own name for 40 years. When he was finished, Mr. Hollis blotted the ink, folded each document, and returned them to the satchel. There is one more thing, Your Grace. Say it. The trust requires that, having activated, you present yourself within 30 days at Welberry Hall before 3 witnesses, claim the dukedom back into your hand, and remove your son's authority by direct word. The trust cannot do that for you. You must do it, in person, at the door, as yourself. Edmund looked at the door, the one he had broken open with his walking stick, the one that, somewhere far behind him, had been bolted against him. He smiled for the first time in 2 months. Then we ride at dawn. They rode through the morning. Mr. Hollis had brought 2 horses tied at the inn. A steady bay for Edmund, a chestnut for himself. Edmund had not ridden in 5 months. His knees protested. His back protested. He did not care. By noon they reached the village. By 2 they were at the gates of Welberry Hall. The gates were open. Carriages had been coming and going all morning. Marcus, it seemed, was throwing a luncheon. Edmund could hear laughter rolling across the lawn even from the road. Edmund stopped his horse at the gate. You are certain of every figure, he said to Hollis. Every figure, Your Grace. And the witnesses. Hollis nodded behind him. 2 riders had joined them at the village. a magistrate and a senior clerk of the county court, both of whom Hollis had ridden ahead to fetch the day before. Edmund did not know either of them personally. That was the point. Marcus had not bribed them, because Marcus did not know they existed. Then we ride in. The four of them crossed the lawn slowly. The footman at the front door, the same footman who had pulled the upstairs curtain in Edmund's face the day before, froze when he saw who was approaching. He did not bow. He did not move at all. He stood with his mouth slightly open. Edmund did not look at him. He swung down from the horse. He climbed the steps. He pushed the door open with the head of his walking stick. The hall was full of people. 50, perhaps 60. The long dining table had been brought into the entry to accommodate the crowd. Marcus stood at the head of it with a glass raised. Isolde sat at his right. The men around them were laughing. The laughter stopped first at the back of the room, where a young woman saw Edmund and went still. It traveled forward in a wave. By the time it reached the head of the table, the silence was complete. Marcus turned. His face went through several expressions very quickly: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, the practiced smile of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. "Father, you are well. I was worried. The servants told me you had walked out yesterday in the rain. I was about to send a search party." "Were you?" "Of course. With the door bolted behind me." Marcus's smile flickered. "A misunderstanding. The new staff." "Be quiet." A small word, spoken in the voice Edmund had used for 40 years to negotiate with princes and to put down strikes at his mills. The room felt it. Marcus felt it. His mouth closed. Edmund stepped into the hall. Mr. Hollis stepped in behind him with the satchel. The magistrate and the clerk took up positions at either side of the door. "Gentlemen and ladies of this house," Edmund said. His voice carried easily. "2 months ago I signed a document that I had not read closely. My son led me to believe it was a routine trust restructuring. It was not. It transferred management of the Welberry estate from my hand into his." A murmur. Marcus opened his mouth. Edmund did not look at him. "That signature stands. I do not contest it. A duke who signs without reading deserves what he gets." He let that hang. The room was very still. "But there is a second instrument. One my grandfather wrote. One my father held in trust. One that activates the moment a Duke of Welberry is cast out of his own house by his own heir. That instrument activated yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when this door was bolted against me. Mr. Hollis." Hollis stepped forward. He unfolded the documents. He read them aloud in the dry, steady voice of a man who had waited 15 years for this moment and intended to do it properly. The trust, the named beneficiary, the conditions for activation, the conditions being met, the transfer of all assets held under the Genoese name into the sole hands of Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Welberry, the value in sterling at present market. The value made Marcus go white. It was 3 times the value of every holding Marcus had seized from him. Hollis kept reading. The trust further entitled Edmund to bring civil claim against any party who had acted to procure his ejection, including the recovery of all monies expended, properties transferred, and authorities ceded. The magistrate behind Edmund cleared his throat at this. He had been briefed. He nodded once at Edmund. Marcus stepped forward. "Father, listen to me. There is no need for." "Sit down." Marcus sat down. Edmund crossed the hall slowly, walking stick tapping against the marble, and stopped at the head of the table. He looked down at his son. "I gave you everything. The mills, the land, the name. I taught you to ride. I taught you to lead men. I taught you, or I tried to teach you, what your mother would have wanted you to know. You took it. And you did this." Marcus's eyes flicked to Isolde. Isolde was looking at the floor. "You forged my signature on the 2nd page of the trust restructure. Mr. Hollis has been studying it for 2 months. He will produce the comparison tomorrow. That is fraud. That is a criminal matter. Not a family matter. A criminal matter. Marcus's mouth opened, closed. I have not decided what I will do about that. You will sit in this house under my hand until I have decided. You will not leave the grounds. You will not touch a coin. You will not give an order. From this moment, the dukedom is again mine. He looked around the room. All of you are guests in my house. The luncheon is over. You will go. Nobody moved for a long second. Then a man near the door turned and walked out. Then another. Then a wave of them. They did not say goodbye. They did not look at Marcus. Within 10 minutes the hall was empty except for Edmund, Marcus, Isolde, Hollis, and the magistrate. Edmund sat down at the head of the table. He took a piece of bread from the platter in front of him. He ate it slowly. He had walked out yesterday with nothing. He had walked in today with everything. The house was quiet for the first time in months. The servants did not know how to act. The ones who had ignored Edmund for the last 2 months stood very still when he passed. The ones who had been hired by Marcus packed their bags and left before they were asked. The old steward, who had retired the year Marcus took the books, sent word from the village that he was willing to come back if he was wanted. Edmund sent for him that evening. It took a week to put the household in order. The locks were changed on the master study. The accounts were reopened under Edmund's name. Hollis rode to London with the signed documents. The trust released its funds within the 7 days he had promised. Marcus did not leave his rooms. Isolde came to her father on the 3rd day. She stood in the doorway of the study and did not speak for a long time. Edmund waited. He did not look up from his ledgers. He had learned, a long time ago, that when a person had something hard to say, the kindest thing was to let the silence do its work and not rush them. I was afraid of him. She said it quietly. Edmund set down his pen. He told me you had lost your mind. He told me you had been giving the mills away to charity. He told me the staff were stealing because you no longer noticed. He told me the only way to save the family name was to take the authority quickly and quietly. I did not see you for weeks at a time. He told me you would not see me. I believed him. Edmund considered her. His daughter, 41 years old. Catherine's eyes. Did you sign the 2nd page? He signed for me. I knew. I let him. That is fraud. I know. Why did you come tell me? She looked at the floor. Because I have to live with myself for a long time after you are gone, Father. And I would rather live with myself having said the truth out loud than not. Edmund nodded slowly. He thought about Catherine. What Catherine would have said. You will make restitution. You will work in the foundation I am about to set up. You will not be paid for it. You will not inherit a penny of the new trust. But you will not be put out of this family. Do you understand me? She closed her eyes. Tears slid down her face. Yes. Go. She went. Marcus was a different matter. Hollis brought the comparison documents on the 5th day. The forgery on the 2nd page was clear. The magistrate had already begun proceedings. There was no rescuing the boy from the criminal side of it. But Edmund chose not to press for prison. He pressed for permanent exile from the estate and from the country. Marcus would go to Canada with an annuity small enough to keep him alive and large enough to keep him from coming back. He would not see his father again. He would not see his sister again. He would not bear the Welberry name. Marcus signed the papers without looking up. Edmund watched him go on a wet Tuesday morning. A carriage to Bristol. A ship in 3 days. The boy he had taught to ride. The boy his wife had tried to give a soul to. Gone. He did not weep. He had used up his weeping years ago. He spent the rest of that morning at his desk. He drafted the charter of the foundation he had been turning over in his mind. The Welberry Trust for Working Children. Schools and apprenticeships in the towns near his mills, paid for from the income of his grandfather's hidden fortune. The figures Hollis had read out in the hall would feed 5,000 children before he died. 10 times that, perhaps, before the trust ran out. Edmund would not see most of it. He did not need to see it. The next afternoon he rode out alone. He took the bay horse and the walking stick and a single saddlebag of food. He rode the path he had walked 2 weeks before, through the pasture, through the hedgerow, into the older woods, past the bracken, over the rise. The cabin sat in its hollow, smoke rising from the chimney. Mr. Hollis had told Edmund he would have the place fully cleaned and stocked for him within a week. Edmund had asked him to put a lock on the door that opened from a key Edmund alone carried. He had asked for the desk to remain, the bookshelf, the kettle, the chair by the hearth. He swung down. He tied the horse. He walked up to the door. He took the key from his pocket. He opened the lock himself. He stepped inside. The fire had been lit that morning by the boy from the inn, who knew his Duke now and would come up twice a week to keep the cabin ready. The chair by the hearth waited. The kettle was warm. A loaf of bread sat on the table. Edmund set down his walking stick. He hung up his coat. He sat by the fire. For a long time he did not move. He thought about the door of Welberry Hall, slamming shut behind him 2 weeks ago, the bolts sliding into place, the laughter inside. He thought about this door, the cabin door, which he had pushed open today with a key in his own hand. No lock against him. No voice on the other side telling him he was no longer welcome. A man was not his children. A man was not the people who chose to stay or leave. A man was the door he kept for himself, in the place that was his alone, where the fire was lit and the bread was on the table and nobody had to ask him to be anything other than what he was. He poured a cup of water from the kettle. He drank it slowly. Outside, the wind moved the trees, and the rain held off, and somewhere in the woods a deer stepped quietly across the path he had come in on. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Welberry, 68 years old, sat by his fire in the cabin his grandfather had built and his father had kept, and the people who loved him had been preparing for him all his life without his ever knowing. He had been abandoned by everyone, and he had never, in all his long life, been less alone.